Greetings, I'm Paisley, and I'm here to recount the most spine-chilling experience of my life. Initially, you might question the authenticity of my encounter with the supernatural, but I assure you, this ghostly encounter was no product of my imagination. I witnessed it firsthand. Prepare yourself for my narrative. Until about a year ago, I was leading what one might call a nearly perfect life. My parents and I resided in a charming home, and I enjoyed popularity at school. I excelled academically, participated in numerous sports clubs, and life was seemingly idyllic. However, my life took a dark and unexpected turn when my parents delivered some devastating news. You see, my mom and dad operated a catering business, but it was floundering to say the least. In fact, it was so dire that they had to concede to a grim reality. We had gone bankrupt. What was even more distressing was that we were compelled to sell our beloved family home and relocate to an entirely different town. Accepting this news was far from easy. In fact, when they initially broke the news, I was consumed by anger, and I refused to communicate with them for weeks. How could they have abruptly upended my life like this? I had to bid farewell to my school friends and everything familiar. Eventually, my anger subsided, replaced by a lingering sense of sadness and anxiety. 2 weeks later, as I packed up my room, the time arrived to bid farewell to our house. I hadn't laid eyes on our new residence prior to our arrival because I had vehemently declined any visits. When we finally reached our new abode, disbelief washed over me. It was like a nightmare come to life. The house appeared antiquated, shrouded by an unruly, overgrown yard, and it was situated in an isolated, desolate area. My parents would now have to chauffeur me everywhere until I could save enough to acquire a car. Yet, it wasn't just the exterior that left me disheartened. My room itself was far from inviting. In the attic, darkness prevailed, casting eerie shadows that sent shivers down my spine. The creaking floorboards beneath my feet added to the ominous atmosphere, and an unsettling, unfamiliar odor hung in the air. I felt as though I had stepped onto the set of a horror film. Mom and Dad reassured me that they planned to renovate the entire house once they had saved enough money. However, that particular night left me feeling disconcerted and terrified. I lay awake in bed, my gaze fixated on the ceiling above. It was unfathomable to me that my parents had uprooted me from my friends and school to dwell in this dismal abode. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I drifted into slumber. But then, something truly unsettling commenced. The details are hazy, but I distinctly recall jolting awake to an uncanny sound. Floorboards in my room creaking ominously. I peered out the window. A tempest raged outside, accompanied by relentless rain. A series of knocks echoed against the window pane, as if someone sought entry from the outside world. Simultaneously, I discerned faint, whispering voices. My efforts to rise were futile. My arms were unresponsive, and my legs felt as heavy as lead, affixed to my body like tree trunks. Paralyzed, I was incapable of uttering a scream. My gaze shifted to the room's corner, where a sinister, shadowy figure crept toward me. I had never believed in ghosts, but what other explanation could there be? This presence was malevolent, immobilizing me in terror. I closed my eyes and offered up a desperate prayer, beseeching not to meet my demise. Somehow, I must have fallen back into slumber. When I awoke, daylight streamed into the room. I sat upright, my mobility restored, and the room appeared entirely normal. There was no trace of the ghostly apparition, yet I knew without a doubt that it had not been a figment of my imagination. That day at school, my mind was consumed by distress and anxiety, rendering me unable to concentrate. I detested the new school as well. Everyone seemed to have already formed cliques of friends, leaving me feeling like an outsider. The teachers weren't any better, displaying a harsh demeanor. One even raised their voice at me for failing to pay attention in class. However, my inability to concentrate stemmed from my preoccupation with the harrowing experience from the previous night. It was clear that I needed to confide in my parents. That evening, I waited up late for my parents, who now toiled long hours at a restaurant due to their new jobs. By the time they arrived home, darkness had descended upon our surroundings. As they entered, I ushered them to sit down, determined to relay the unsettling encounter with the ghost that had paralyzed me during the night. They listened in silence as I recounted my story, but to my disbelief, they responded with laughter. My dad suggested that it was probably just a nightmare, attributing it to my first night in the unfamiliar house. He assured me that they would repaint my room and make it feel more like my own. The more we discussed it, the more I realized the absurdity of my tale. In hindsight, they were right. It had all been a dream. Eventually, I too found myself chuckling. That night, although I went to bed late, exhaustion overtook me, causing me to fall asleep almost instantly. However, the inexplicable happened once more. I awoke, paralyzed with dread, and witnessed the ghost approaching once again. This time, it drew near and pressed against my chest. I had never imagined that ghosts could make physical contact, but this one did, intensifying my fear. Breathing became increasingly arduous, and I feared suffocation. At some point, I must have lost consciousness. The following day, I summoned the courage to share my ordeal with my father, but he responded with anger, instructing me to cease discussing ghosts. He asserted that we all had to make sacrifices, and I had to adapt to our new home whether I liked it or not. Over the ensuing nights, the ghostly apparitions persisted, leaving me so terrified that I began avoiding sleep altogether. Instead, I spent my nights watching videos or listening to music through headphones, desperate to evade the haunting specter that plagued my dreams. As a result, attending school became an insurmountable challenge. I continually dozed off during classes, earning reprimands from exasperated teachers, and my academic performance suffered as my grades plummeted. My struggle to forge friendships left me with no confidence to share my woes with. Then, one fateful day, I experienced a deeply embarrassing incident. I found myself in the midst of a math class, and I must have succumbed to sleep. Upon awakening, a disconcerting silence enveloped the classroom. The teacher stood at the front, fixedly gazing in my direction, while all my peers turned their attention toward me. As I blinked and met their gazes, the teacher burst into laughter, and the entire class followed suit. I was overwhelmed with mortification. It was, without a doubt, the most humiliating moment of my life. In my haste to escape this mortifying situation, I inadvertently toppled my chair and fled from the classroom. Racing to the bathroom, I sought refuge within a stall, where I sobbed uncontrollably. Yet this didn't deter me from my relentless efforts to remain awake at night. On some occasions, exhaustion would overpower me, causing me to slip into a deep slumber, only to awaken paralyzed with terror, the ghost's spectral presence pressing me down. Miraculously, I managed to endure. I attempted to catch my mom alone to discuss my predicament, but she insisted she was too occupied with work and that I needed to adapt to sleeping in our new home. Then, a chilling turn of events unfolded. During one fateful day in gym class, we took turns ascending a climbing wall. I used to possess a strong athletic prowess and cherished my time in the gym. However, my perpetual fatigue had transformed my passion into disdain. Donning a helmet, I embarked on the ascent of the climbing wall. As I began the climb, an overwhelming dizziness washed over me. Nevertheless, I somehow reached the summit in an astonishingly swift fashion, eliciting applause from the gym teacher. Yet, when it was time to descend, the room began to spin, causing me to lose my footing. Then darkness descended upon me. I awoke in a hospital bed, a tube snaking into my arm, and the rhythmic beeping of machines serving as an eerie backdrop. I called out for assistance, and a nurse entered the room to summon a doctor. She informed me that my parents were en route and disclosed that I had fainted due to sheer exhaustion. She inquired about the events leading up to my collapse, and I couldn't hold back the tears. I poured out my heart, recounting the tale of how I had been uprooted from my home and school, severed ties with my friends, and was now residing in a house I believed to be haunted. I had anticipated mockery, much like what I had encountered from my parents. However, to my astonishment, the doctor listened attentively, diligently taking notes. It was a tremendous relief to know that she was genuinely interested in my story. She proceeded to inquire about the ghostly encounters, urging me to describe the emotions and sensations it had evoked. Then, unexpectedly, she affirmed her belief in me. She conveyed that further tests were necessary and hooked me up to additional machines. It was at this juncture that my parents arrived at the hospital. I recounted the entire ordeal to my parents, but their reaction was one of anger. Dad admonished me for fainting and emphasized the need for self-care. He explained that they were working tirelessly to provide for our family and couldn't cope with this added concern. I was taken aback. I had fainted, and my parents were laying blame on me. Before our discussion could escalate into an argument, the doctor entered the room and initiated a conversation with my parents. She informed them that she had looked into the ghostly encounter I had described and believed my account. It wasn't a fabrication. She diagnosed me with something called sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis, she explained, could lead to waking up while being unable to move, and hallucinations were a common byproduct, elucidating why I had seen a ghost pressing against my chest. It was there in my perception, but not in reality. She prescribed medication and advised me to lead a less stressful life. I cast a glance at my parents, struggling to fathom their disbelief in my experience. That was 4 months ago, and I've made significant progress since then. Instances of sleep paralysis have become less frequent, and knowing the cause has made it a bit less daunting. Don't get me wrong, being immobilized in bed is still unsettling, but with the knowledge that it will eventually pass, I can face it with greater composure. I'm currently taking medication, which has been immensely beneficial, and I've taken proactive measures to ensure I get a restful night's sleep while managing stress. School has also improved significantly. I confided in the school dean about my sleep paralysis, and as a result, my teachers are now aware of my condition. With their understanding that I'm not simply lazy, they've become much more supportive. As for my parents, things have taken a different turn since discovering that I have sleep paralysis and recognizing that stress may have contributed to it. They've been incessantly apologizing to me for not believing in my experience. My mom has been particularly emotional, often breaking into tears due to overwhelming guilt, but I've forgiven them. I empathize with the challenges they've been facing. Both of them are utterly exhausted from working long hours to provide for our family and maintain our home. A silver lining has emerged from this ordeal. I'm finally acclimating to our new house. Now that I know it's not haunted, I've developed a fondness for it. I've been actively involved in decorating with my parents, and my room is gradually transforming into a space that truly feels like my own. Reflecting on the time when I believed my room was haunted, it all seems quite surreal now, but in the moment it was genuinely distressing. It underscores the idea that our most formidable fears can often have logical explanations. I sincerely hope that by sharing my story with you, I've been able to assist others in confronting their own fears and uncertainties.